Maya Blackfeather never intended to prove anyone wrong. She simply wanted to serve her country. Just like her grandfather who had fought in Vietnam and her father who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. But when she walked into the advanced sniper training facility at Fort Benning, Georgia, the whispers started immediately. At 24, Maya stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with long black hair typically braided down her back, and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Her great-grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee, and Maya had grown up on the reservation in North Carolina, learning to hunt and track before she could properly tie her shoes. Her family had always lived off the land. And shooting wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. The other trainees were mostly men, many of them already seasoned soldiers from various special operations units. Among them were 3 Navy SEALs who had recently completed their basic SEAL training and were now pursuing advanced sniper qualifications. Jake Morrison, Tyler Brooks, and David Chen had already earned their reputations in their previous deployments, and they carried themselves with the confidence that came from surviving some of the military's toughest training. Maya had earned her place in the program through exceptional performance in the Army Rangers, where she had consistently outshot her male counterparts during basic marksmanship training. Her commanding officers had noticed her natural ability and recommended her for the advanced sniper course, despite the raised eyebrows from some of the old-school instructors who still believed that precision shooting was a man's domain. On the first day of training, Instructor Sergeant First Class Rodriguez gathered the 12 candidates in a circle and began explaining the rigorous 6-month program ahead of them. The course would test everything from basic marksmanship to advanced ballistics, camouflage techniques, stalking, and long-range precision shooting. Only about half of the candidates were expected to graduate. During the lunch break, Maya sat alone at a table, methodically cleaning her issued rifle while studying a ballistics manual. The 3 SEALs occupied the table behind her, their voices carrying despite their attempts to keep the conversation low. "I give her 3 weeks, Jake said, taking a bite of his sandwich. "This isn't about being politically correct anymore. When you're downrange and someone's life depends on that shot, you need someone who can handle the pressure." Tyler nodded in agreement. "My money's on 2 weeks. Did you see how she holds her rifle?" "This isn't about shooting deer from 50 yards. David, who was typically the quietest of the 3, added his own observation. "She keeps looking at that old rifle case she brought. Probably some family heirloom she thinks is better than military-grade equipment." These traditional types always think the old ways are better. Maya's jaw tightened, but she continued cleaning her rifle without turning around. She had heard variations of these comments throughout her military career, and she had learned that responding only made things worse. Instead, she focused on proving herself through performance. The next morning brought their first major test, a 500-yard precision shooting exercise using standard military rifles and ammunition. Each candidate would fire 10 rounds at human-sized targets, and their scores would determine their initial ranking in the class. The pressure was immediate and intense, as everyone knew that consistently poor performance early in the program could lead to being dropped from the course. Maya stepped up to the firing line when her number was called. The wind was mild but variable, and she spent a full minute observing the grass and leaves to understand the wind patterns. She adjusted her scope accordingly, controlled her breathing, and began her sequence. 10 shots, each carefully placed and timed with her natural respiratory pause. When the targets were retrieved and scored, Maya had achieved a perfect score, 10 shots in the X-ring, with her tightest group measuring just 1.2 inches. It was the best performance of the day, better than any of the SEALs or the other experienced operators in the class. Sergeant Rodriguez announced the scores without emotion, but Maya noticed him making a note next to her name on his clipboard. The 3 SEALs, who had scored well but not exceptionally, exchanged glances but said nothing. Over the following weeks, the training intensified. They learned advanced techniques for reading wind and weather conditions, calculating bullet drop at extreme distances, and maintaining accuracy while under stress. They practiced shooting from unconventional positions, through small openings, and while wearing full gear in various weather conditions. Maya consistently performed at the top of the class, but the comments from her fellow trainees continued. During one particularly challenging exercise, where they had to hit targets while lying in muddy water for 6 hours. Tyler made a comment about natural camouflage that drew snickers from some of the other students. When Maya successfully completed a difficult stalking exercise by moving undetected across 800 yards of open terrain to within 10 feet of the instructors, Jake suggested that tracking comes naturally to some people, in a tone that made his meaning clear. The breaking point came during week 8 of the program. The class was practicing long-range shots at 1,200 yards, a distance where wind, temperature, and humidity all played crucial roles in bullet placement. Maya had been shooting consistently well, but several of her classmates were struggling with the complex calculations required for accuracy at that range. During a break between shooting sessions, Maya overheard Jake talking to Tyler and David near the equipment shed. "I'm telling you, something's not right," Jake said, checking to make sure the instructors were out of earshot. "Nobody shoots that consistently well, without some kind of advantage. Maybe she's getting extra help from the instructors, or maybe she's using some kind of traditional knowledge that gives her an unfair edge." Tyler's response was even more direct. "My uncle always said you can't trust the quiet ones. They're always hiding something. She probably learned some kind of native tracking magic or something that helps her read the wind." David laughed. "But there was an edge to it. Come on, guys. Next you'll be telling me she's got some kind of mystical connection to the earth that helps her aim better. She's good. I'll give her that. But when it comes to real combat conditions, all that traditional stuff falls apart. She's never been in a real firefight where someone's shooting back." Maya had heard enough. She stood up from where she had been sitting and walked directly to where the 3 men were standing. Her voice was calm, but firm when she spoke. "If you have something to say about my performance or my methods, you can say it to my face. And if you think my background gives me some kind of unfair advantage, then maybe you should spend less time talking and more time practicing." The 3 SEALs looked surprised that she had confronted them directly. Jake recovered first, his expression shifting to a condescending smile. "Look, we're not trying to be disrespectful. It's just that some of us have been in actual combat situations where lives depended on making the shot. This is all just training for you. But for those of us who've been downrange, we know what real pressure feels like." Maya's dark eyes fixed on Jake's face. "You think I don't understand pressure? You think growing up on the reservation, watching my community struggle with poverty and addiction while trying to maintain our traditions, didn't teach me anything about pressure? You think earning my place in the Rangers through performance, not connections, didn't involve pressure?" Tyler stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "We're all on the same team here. Let's just focus on the training." But Maya wasn't finished. "No, let's talk about this. You've been making comments about my traditional methods and native advantages for weeks. What exactly do you think I'm doing differently than any of you?" David, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Well, you always seem to know which way the wind is blowing without checking the flags or the grass. And you make these tiny adjustments that somehow always work out perfectly. It's like you've got some kind of instinct the rest of us don't have." Maya almost smiled at that. "You want to know my secret? My grandfather taught me to observe everything around me before making any decision. He taught me that if you watch the environment carefully enough, it will tell you everything you need to know. That's not magic. That's patience and attention to detail." She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "And as for combat experience, you're right that I haven't been in a firefight yet. But neither had any of you before your first deployment. The difference is, I'm not letting my ego convince me that I already know everything I need to know." Sergeant Rodriguez appeared around the corner of the equipment shed, clearly having heard at least part of the conversation. His expression was unreadable as he looked at the 4 trainees. "Is there a problem here that's going to interfere with this afternoon's training?" he asked in the neutral tone that all experienced military instructors seemed to master. "No, Sergeant," Maya replied immediately. "We were just discussing different approaches to wind reading." Rodriguez nodded slowly. Good. Because this afternoon we're moving to 1,600 yards, and I expect everyone to be focused on their performance, not on anyone else's methods. The bullets don't care about your personal opinions. As the group broke up to prepare for the afternoon session, Maya realized that the real test wasn't going to be about her shooting ability. It was going to be about whether she could maintain her focus and performance while dealing with the ongoing skepticism and subtle hostility from some of her fellow trainees. That afternoon, at 1,600 yards, the targets became small dots barely visible through the scopes, even at high magnification. The wind was gusty and unpredictable, shifting direction every few minutes. Temperature variations created heat mirages that made accurate range estimation nearly impossible. It was the kind of shooting that separated the naturally gifted from the merely well-trained. Maya took her position on the firing line and began her careful observation routine. She watched the grass at various distances, noted the heat shimmer patterns, and felt the wind on her face. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and prepared for her first shot. The bullet struck the target just outside the X-ring, a shot that would have been excellent under normal conditions, but felt like a miss to Maya at this level of training. She made a small adjustment and fired again. This time, the bullet found the center of the target. Over the next hour, she continued shooting with steady consistency, adapting to the changing wind conditions and maintaining accuracy despite the challenging distance. When the scores were tallied, she had achieved the highest score of the day once again, with 8 of her 10 shots landing in the X-ring. Jake, who had struggled with the wind calls and managed only 4 shots in the scoring rings, shook his head as he packed up his equipment. "I don't care what anyone says," he muttered to Tyler. "That's not normal. Nobody adapts to changing conditions that fast without some kind of edge." But Maya wasn't paying attention to the comments anymore. She was focused on the realization that her performance was drawing attention not just from her fellow trainees, but from the instructors as well. Sergeant Rodriguez had been watching her more carefully during the afternoon session, and she had noticed him making additional notes on his evaluation sheet. After the day's training concluded, Rodriguez approached her as she was cleaning her rifle. "Blackfeather, I want to talk to you about something," he said, his tone still neutral but with a hint of curiosity. "Your performance has been consistently outstanding, but I'm interested in your thought process. Walk me through how you made your wind calls this afternoon." Maya set down her cleaning rod and considered how to explain her methods. Not just the flags or the grass near the targets, but the patterns in between. Wind doesn't usually change direction instantly. It flows and shifts gradually. If you watch carefully, you can see the changes coming before they affect your bullet's path. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "And how did you learn to read environmental conditions that way?" "My grandfather taught me to hunt when I was 7, Maya replied. "He said that if you want to be successful, you have to understand that you're part of the environment, not separate from it. You have to feel the wind, understand the temperature changes, and read the signs that tell you what's happening around you." "Interesting," Rodriguez said, making another note. "Have you ever considered that your background might be exactly what we need in certain specialized situations?" Maya wasn't sure what he meant by that, but something in his tone suggested that her performance had caught the attention of people beyond the immediate training cadre. As she finished cleaning her rifle and prepared to head to the barracks, she couldn't shake the feeling that her real test was just beginning. That evening, as she lay in her bunk, reviewing the day's performance and preparing for the next phase of training, Maya thought about her grandfather's words from years earlier. "The hardest battles aren't always against the enemy in front of you. Sometimes they're against the people who should be on your side." She was beginning to understand what he had meant. 3 months into the advanced sniper program, Maya Blackfeather had established herself as the top performer in nearly every category. Her shooting scores consistently ranked first in the class. Her stalking and camouflage techniques were flawless, and her ability to calculate complex ballistics problems under pressure had impressed even the most skeptical instructors. But the tension with some of her fellow trainees, particularly the 3 Navy SEALs, had only intensified. The breaking point came during a field exercise, designed to simulate real combat conditions. The trainees were divided into teams and tasked with establishing observation posts in mountainous terrain, where they would spend 3 days tracking simulated enemy movements and calling in precision shots on designated targets. Maya found herself paired with Jake Morrison, much to both of their displeasure. The assignment required them to move undetected across 12 miles of rough terrain, establish a concealed position, and maintain surveillance while being hunted by instructors playing the role of enemy forces. It was exactly the kind of high-stress, extended operation where personality conflicts could become dangerous. On the first night, as they lay concealed in a carefully constructed hide site overlooking a valley where their targets would appear, Jake finally voiced what had been building for months. "I've been thinking about what you said back at the range," he whispered, his voice barely audible even though they were alone on the mountainside. "About growing up on the reservation and earning your place through performance. I respect that. I really do. But you have to understand something too." Maya kept her eyes on the valley below while listening. "What's that? When I was in Afghanistan, I watched a Marine sniper miss a shot that could have saved 3 guys in my squad. The bullet went 6 inches high because he didn't account for the temperature difference between morning and afternoon. 6 inches meant the difference between those guys going home to their families and coming back in body bags." Maya adjusted her scope slightly as clouds moved across the moon, changing the available light. "That's a terrible thing to experience. But what does that have to do with me?" Jake was quiet for a long moment before responding. "It has to do with trust. When you're downrange, you need to know that the person next to you has been tested in every possible way. All this training is designed to weed out anyone who might crack under pressure. And the thing is, you've never been tested in real combat. Neither have about half the people in this course," Maya pointed out. "Yeah, but they don't make it look as easy as you do. Nobody should be as naturally good at this as you seem to be. It makes the rest of us wonder if there's something we don't know about your background or your methods." Maya turned to look at Jake directly, her expression serious in the green glow of their night vision equipment. "You want to know the truth about my methods? My grandfather didn't just teach me to hunt. He taught me that every shot you take carries responsibility. When you're hunting to feed your family, you don't get a second chance if you miss. There's no backup plan, no support team, no second-guess opportunities." She paused, checking the wind direction by watching the movement of grass in the valley below. "That kind of pressure teaches you to be absolutely certain before you pull the trigger. It teaches you to read every environmental factor perfectly because you only get one opportunity. Maybe that's why this training feels natural to me because I've been preparing for it my entire life." Jake considered this explanation, and for the first time since the course began, his expression seemed less skeptical and more thoughtful. "I never thought about it that way, but you have to understand our perspective too. We've seen what happens when people who look good in training fall apart in real combat situations. Then test me," Maya said simply. "If you're worried about how I'll perform under real pressure, then find a way to test me that goes beyond anything we've done in training so far." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Maya gestured toward her personal rifle case, which lay beside her standard military equipment. Throughout the entire course, she had consistently used the issued military rifles for all official exercises, but she had brought her family's hunting rifle with her to every training session. It was an older model Winchester that had belonged to her grandfather, carefully maintained and customized over the years, but definitely not military specification. "That old rifle has been in my family for 3 generations, she said. "My great-grandfather used it to hunt during the Depression. My grandfather carried it in Vietnam as a backup weapon. My father used it to put food on the table when I was growing up. Every major shot I learned to make was with that rifle." Jake looked at the worn leather case with new interest. "What are you proposing?" "There's a long-range exercise coming up next week. The instructors are planning to test us at distances we haven't attempted yet. Probably 2,000 yards or more. If you really want to see what I can do under pressure, challenge me to make that shot With my family rifle, instead of the military equipment. Jake was quiet for several minutes, considering the implications. Using personal equipment in official training exercises was technically against regulations, and the distances Maya was talking about were at the very edge of what was considered possible, even with the most advanced military rifles and ammunition. You're talking about making a shot that maybe 1% of military snipers ever attempt in real combat, he said finally. With a rifle that's probably older than both of us. Why would you want to take that kind of risk? Maya's answer was immediate and certain. Because you and the others need to see that my abilities aren't based on some mystical connection to nature or special advantages. They're based on years of practice, discipline, and respect for the responsibility that comes with precision shooting. If I can make an impossible shot with the rifle my grandfather taught me on, then maybe you'll understand that I belong here. Jake shook his head slowly. If you miss a shot like that in front of the instructors and the other trainees, it could affect your standing in the program. You're already performing at the top of the class. Why risk that for the opinion of a few people who might never be convinced anyway? Because, Maya said, returning her attention to the valley below, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to show. I didn't come this far to prove myself to the people who already believe in me. I came this far to prove myself to the people who doubt that someone like me belongs in special operations. The rest of their 3-day field exercise passed without incident. They successfully completed their surveillance mission, calling in accurate information on simulated enemy movements and demonstrating their ability to remain undetected despite intensive searching by the instructor teams. When they returned to base, both Maya and Jake had received high marks for their performance, and their working relationship had evolved from mutual suspicion to grudging respect. But the real test was still coming. Word had spread through the training company that the final long-range exercise would push the trainees to distances that few military snipers ever attempted in actual combat. The rumor was that they would be shooting at targets placed at 2,500 yards, a distance where even the smallest environmental factors could cause a complete miss. Sergeant Rodriguez confirmed the rumors during the next morning's briefing. Next Wednesday, we'll be conducting the final long-range precision test. You'll be shooting at targets placed at 2,500 yards, using standard military rifles and match-grade ammunition. This is not a test that everyone is expected to pass. It's designed to identify those candidates who have the potential for extremely specialized long-range missions. He paused, scanning the assembled trainees with his usual expression of professional detachment. I should also mention that this exercise is being observed by representatives from Joint Special Operations Command. They're looking for candidates for a classified program that requires exceptional long-range precision capabilities. Maya felt her heart rate increase slightly. JSOC represented the most elite units in the military, and selection for their programs was extraordinarily competitive. The fact that her performance in this course had attracted their attention suggested that her future in special operations might depend on this single exercise. After the briefing, she approached Sergeant Rodriguez privately. Sergeant, I have a request regarding the long-range exercise. Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork with mild interest. What kind of request, Blackfeather? I'd like permission to use my personal rifle instead of the standard military equipment. Rodriguez's expression became more focused. That's an unusual request. Why would you want to use non-standard equipment for the most important exercise of the course? Maya had prepared for this question. The rifle has sentimental value, and I've been shooting with it since I was a child. I'm more familiar with its characteristics than any other weapon. If this exercise is being observed by JSOC representatives, I want to perform at my absolute best. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. What kind of rifle are we talking about? Winchester Model 70, customized for long-range precision. It belonged to my grandfather. And you think you can achieve better performance with a civilian hunting rifle than with military-grade precision equipment? Maya met his gaze steadily. I think I can achieve better performance with the rifle I know best, regardless of its specifications. Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard. I'll consider your request and let you know. But understand that if you miss the target by a significant margin, it will reflect poorly on your overall evaluation. I understand, Sergeant. As Maya left the instructor's office, she realized that she had just committed herself to a demonstration that would either validate her place among the most elite soldiers in the military or potentially end her special operations career before it really began. The next few days would be spent preparing for a shot that would test everything she had learned, not just during the sniper course, but throughout her entire life. That evening, she carefully cleaned and inspected her grandfather's rifle, checking every component and making minor adjustments to the scope. The weapon was indeed older than standard military equipment, but it had been lovingly maintained and gradually upgraded over the years. The barrel had been replaced twice, the trigger mechanism had been refined for precision, and the scope was a high-quality civilian model that her father had saved months to afford. As she worked, Maya thought about all the shots that had been fired through this rifle over the decades. Her great-grandfather had used it to hunt deer during the Great Depression, providing protein for a family struggling to survive. Her grandfather had carried it through the jungles of Vietnam, where it had saved his life on more than one occasion. Her father had used it to teach her the fundamentals of shooting, emphasizing accuracy, patience, and respect for the power of precision firearms. Now it was her turn to test both herself and the rifle at a distance that none of her family members had ever attempted. At 2,500 yards, even the most advanced military rifles required perfect conditions and flawless technique to achieve accuracy. With her grandfather's hunting rifle, the shot would require something approaching perfection in every aspect of preparation and execution. But as Maya finished her preparation and carefully stored the rifle in its case, she felt more confident than nervous. Every shot she had ever made had been building toward this moment, and she was ready to demonstrate that traditional skills, properly applied, could compete with any modern technology or training method. The only question was whether her fellow trainees, particularly the 3 Navy SEALs who had questioned her abilities from the beginning, were ready to see what she was truly capable of achieving. Wednesday morning arrived with perfect shooting conditions that seemed almost too good to be true. The sky was clear with unlimited visibility. Temperatures were cool and stable, and the wind was light and consistent. For a long-range precision exercise, these were the ideal circumstances that snipers could only hope for. Maya Blackfeather arrived at the range early, carrying her grandfather's rifle case along with her standard military equipment. Sergeant Rodriguez had approved her request to use the family rifle, though he had made it clear that this decision would be closely scrutinized by the JSOC observers who had arrived the previous evening. The observers were an intimidating group: a colonel from Army Special Operations Command, a Navy SEAL commander, and a civilian contractor who introduced himself only as Smith and whose specific role was never explained. They positioned themselves at the observation tower with high-powered spotting scopes and note-taking equipment that suggested this exercise was being documented in considerable detail. The target range had been extended to accommodate the 2,500-yard shot, with steel targets placed on a distant ridge that was barely visible to the naked eye. Even through high-magnification scopes, the targets appeared as small dots that would require perfect precision to hit consistently. The instructors had explained that successful hits at this distance would qualify the trainees for consideration for the most specialized long-range missions in the military. As the 12 remaining candidates assembled at the firing line, Maya noticed that the 3 Navy SEALs were watching her more carefully than usual. Jake Morrison approached her as she was setting up her shooting position. "So, you're really going to do this?" he said, nodding toward the rifle case. "Use your grandfather's hunting rifle for the most important shot of the course." "That's the plan," Maya replied, carefully removing the Winchester from its case and beginning her pre-shooting inspection routine. Tyler Brooks joined the conversation, his tone less confrontational than it had been in previous weeks. "Look, I know we haven't exactly been supportive, but I have to ask, are you sure about this? That's a really long shot, and if you miss by much, it's going to reflect badly on your final evaluation." Maya looked up from her rifle preparation. "Why are you concerned about my evaluation? I thought you wanted to see me fail." Tyler looked uncomfortable. "That's not exactly true. We wanted to see you tested under real pressure. But after watching your performance over the past few months, especially during the field exercises, we've realized that you might actually be as good as your scores suggest. David Chen, who had been quiet during most of their previous interactions, spoke up. What Tyler's trying to say is that we've been judging you unfairly. Your methods might be different from ours, but your results speak for themselves. We don't want to see you take an unnecessary risk that could hurt your career. Maya paused in her preparation and looked at the three men who had been her harshest critics. I appreciate that. I really do. But I need to prove something here. Not just to you, but to myself. I've been shooting with this rifle since I was 7 years old. If I can't trust it for the most important shot of my career, then I don't deserve to be here. Jake nodded slowly. Fair enough. But just so you know, we'll be pulling for you out there. As the exercise began, each candidate was given time to study the conditions, make calculations, and prepare for their shot. The distance was so extreme that even small environmental factors like humidity and temperature variations could affect bullet trajectory by several feet. Most of the trainees were using advanced ballistic computers to calculate the necessary adjustments for their shots. Maya took a different approach. She spent nearly 30 minutes simply observing the environment between her position and the target. She watched the grass and vegetation at various distances, noted the heat shimmer patterns, and felt the wind on her face. She observed the behavior of birds flying across the range and the movement of dust particles in the air. Everything her grandfather had taught her about reading natural signs was being applied to this single shot. When her turn came to shoot, Maya took her position behind her grandfather's rifle and adjusted the scope for the extreme distance. The target, which appeared as a tiny speck even through high magnification, required her to aim several feet above the actual target to account for bullet drop over the 2,500-yard distance. The JSOC observers focused their spotting equipment on her position, and she could feel the attention of everyone on the range. This shot would determine not just her final ranking in the course, but potentially her entire future in special operations. Maya controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the focused state that her grandfather had taught her to achieve before every important shot. The world around her seemed to fade away until nothing existed except the target, the rifle, and the environmental factors that would determine the bullet's path. She made her final adjustments based on her observations of the wind patterns, checked her breathing one more time, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, and the bullet began its 3-second journey toward the distant target. At 2,500 yards, it was impossible to see the impact point without high-powered optics. The spotters at the observation tower would determine whether the shot had hit or missed, and how close to the center of the target the bullet had struck. Several seconds passed in complete silence as the spotters confirmed the impact location. Finally, Sergeant Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with a tone of disbelief. Confirmed hit, dead center, X-ring. The reaction from the other trainees was immediate and dramatic. Several of them broke into spontaneous applause, and Jake Morrison let out a low whistle of amazement. That's impossible, Tyler said, shaking his head. Nobody makes a first-round hit at 2,500 yards. The best military snipers in the world consider themselves lucky to hit the target at all at that distance. But Maya wasn't finished. She had chambered another round while the spotters were confirming her first hit, and she was already preparing for a second shot. If one perfect shot could be considered lucky, 2 perfect shots would prove that her performance was based on skill rather than chance. She went through her preparation routine again, checking the wind conditions and making minor adjustments based on any changes since her first shot. The pressure was enormous now. Everyone on the range was watching to see if she could duplicate her performance. Her second shot produced the same result. Another X-ring hit at 2,500 yards with her grandfather's hunting rifle. The silence that followed was profound. Even the JSOC observers were exchanging glances and checking their equipment as if they couldn't believe what they had witnessed. Colonel Harris, the Army Special Operations representative, approached Maya as she was clearing her rifle. "I need to ask you some questions about your background and training methods." "Yes, sir. Where did you learn to shoot at these distances?" "I've never attempted shots at this distance before, sir. But my grandfather taught me to read environmental conditions and understand how they affect bullet trajectory. The principles are the same, regardless of the distance." "And you've never received any specialized long-range training outside of this course?" "No, sir. Everything I know about precision shooting I learned from my grandfather and through my own practice and study." Colonel Harris made notes on his clipboard while shaking his head slowly. "In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anyone achieve that level of accuracy at extreme range, especially not with civilian hunting equipment." The Navy SEAL commander joined the conversation. "The shot you just made would be considered exceptional, even with the most advanced military rifles and ammunition. The fact that you achieved it with what appears to be a decades-old hunting rifle raises some interesting questions about our equipment procurement and training methods." Maya wasn't sure how to respond to that comment, so she simply said, "The rifle has been well maintained and gradually upgraded over the years, sir, but the most important factor is understanding how it behaves under different conditions." The civilian contractor, who had introduced himself as Smith, approached with his own set of questions. "I'm interested in your methodology for reading wind and environmental conditions. You spent significantly more time observing the range than the other candidates. What exactly were you looking for?" Maya explained her grandfather's teachings about reading natural signs and understanding how environmental factors interact with each other. She described how she had learned to observe multiple indicators simultaneously and integrate them into a comprehensive understanding of the conditions affecting her shot. "Interesting," Smith said, making his own notes. "We've been developing computer models to predict environmental effects on long-range precision shooting. Your intuitive approach might be more effective than our technological solutions." As the exercise concluded and the final scores were tallied, Maya had achieved something unprecedented in the history of the course. Not only had she graduated at the top of her class, but her performance during the final exercise had set a new standard for long-range precision shooting. The 3 Navy SEALs who had initially doubted her abilities approached her as she was packing up her equipment. "We owe you an apology," Jake said, his tone serious and respectful. "We made assumptions about your background and abilities that were completely unfair. What you accomplished out there today was extraordinary." Tyler nodded in agreement. "More than that. You've changed the way I think about training and preparation. Your approach to reading environmental conditions is something we could all learn from." Mark 4. Mark 4. David added, "If we ever have the opportunity to work together in the future, we'd be honored to have you on our team." Maya accepted their apologies graciously, understanding that their initial skepticism had been based on their own experiences and the pressure they felt to maintain the standards of their units. "I appreciate that, and I hope we do have the chance to work together. Despite our differences, I learned a lot from watching your techniques and approaches to problem solving." As the candidates were dismissed from the final exercise, Sergeant Rodriguez pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. "Blackfeather, I've been instructing sniper courses for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished today. The JSOC representatives have specifically requested your file, and I expect you'll be hearing from them soon about opportunities that go far beyond anything we've discussed in this course." "What kind of opportunities, Sergeant?" "The kind that I'm not cleared to discuss, but that would make full use of your exceptional abilities. Let's just say that your performance today has opened doors that very few soldiers ever get to walk through." As Maya left the range that day, carrying her grandfather's rifle in its worn leather case, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The shot that had initially been intended to prove her abilities to a few skeptical fellow trainees had instead demonstrated capabilities that would shape the rest of her military career. Her grandfather had always taught her that every shot carries responsibility, and that precision comes from understanding rather than technology. As she walked toward an uncertain but promising future in special operations, Maya realized that the most important lesson he had given her wasn't about shooting at all. It was about the confidence to trust her abilities and the courage to prove herself when others doubted her worth. The native ghost, as some of the other trainees had begun calling her, had indeed landed an impossible shot. But more importantly, she had landed her place among the most elite soldiers in the world, carrying forward the traditions and wisdom of her grandfather while writing her own chapter in the history of military precision shooting. 3 months later, Maya received orders for a classified assignment that would take her to some of the most remote and dangerous locations in the world, where her unique combination of traditional skills and modern training would prove invaluable. The shot that had started as a way to silence her critics had instead announced her arrival as one of the military's most capable long-range precision specialists. Her grandfather's rifle would accompany her on those missions, a reminder that the oldest skills, properly applied, could still compete with any modern technology. And in the special operations community, the story of the Cherokee soldier who made an impossible shot with her family hunting rifle would become legend, inspiring a new generation of soldiers to look beyond conventional methods and embrace the wisdom of traditional approaches to precision and patience.